I was also diagnosed with bipolar. So I think I became so obsessive with service right off the bat, but it was good in this instance because it was able to literally keep me out of my head and keep me engaged with doing things outside of myself. Because in that moment, they say, when it's you and that drink, hopefully you have a high power. But I think there's a reason there's three major pillars to sobriety, and unity and service is what leads to recovery. So service is always going to be a huge part of.
Welcome to the Daily Reflection Podcast with your hosts Michael L. and Lee M. This is a show where we provide experience, strength, and hope through interviews with members of the recovery community. The show is not affiliated with any 12-step or recovery program, although you may hear them mentioned throughout the course of an interview. Today on the show, Natasha M. from Abington, Pennsylvania, by way of South Africa. Natasha performs a lot of service as a part of her recovery program, and she mentions CPC quite a bit in this episode. CPC is the cooperation with the professional community. You can find more information about CPC at aa.org. We hope you enjoy this episode.
Good morning, Mike. How are you this morning?
Great, Lee. Doing awesome. How are you today?
I am doing great. It is March 4th this morning, and who do we have with us today?
Oh, we've got a special guest. Her name is Natasha M., and she's originally from South Africa. She's from Abington now, and I'm really excited to have her on the show. Natasha, welcome.
Thanks, guys. Natasha from South Africa. And my sobriety date is June 28th, 2017. I currently live in Abington and spent some time in Philly as well.
Fantastic. Well, we start the show out in the same way every day. We ask the guest if they would read the daily reflection for today. Would you help us get started?
Absolutely. Daily reflection for March 4th, Weeding the Garden. The essence of all growth is a willingness to make a change for the better, and then an unremitting willingness to shoulder whatever responsibility this entails. As Bill sees it, page 115. By the time I had reached step 3, I had been freed of my dependence on alcohol. But bitter experience has shown me that continuous sobriety requires continuous effort. Every now and then I pause to take a good look at my progress. More and more of my garden is weeded each time I look, but each time I also find new weeds sprouting where I thought I had made my final pass with the blade. As I head back to get the newly sprouted weed, it's easier when they are young. I take a moment to admire how lush the growing vegetables and flowers are, and my labors are rewarded. My sobriety grows and bears fruit.
So what does that mean to you, Natasha, as you read it?
It's so crazy how I'm always taken aback by how the spiritual component of being sober is what informs and leads my life today, especially my sober life. And I enjoy very much kind of that word surrender that comes up a lot for me as I read this every time, because everything to do with who I am today as a sober woman began with surrender. Surrendering to changing everything about how I live, surrendering to changing how I think, surrendering then ultimately to making the decision to begin to believe in something greater than myself. And that has catapulted, they say, the fourth dimension in some of the literature we read, but it has completely catapulted how I navigate life, how I engage my life, and how I engage my relationships. And it all began truly with just that, putting the weapons down and giving it over to something far greater than I. And that began primarily with the group of people in early sobriety, but then ultimately grew to my spiritual journey today.
But it does require continuous effort, right?
Continuous is the understatement. So I think I never appreciated how discipline is such a key part in learning how to stay sober and how to be sober, especially in the early days of sobriety for me. It's a daily reprieve, and thank God that's something that's always been made clear to me, that it first began with like just that daily attendance of, whether it's a meeting for someone, and for me that's what it was, of talking to another person who's in sobriety and in recovery. I began with then praying, because that was a difficult piece for me. So slowly but surely, each and every single tool that was slowly becoming illuminated to me as I stayed sober, I learned that that's something I continuously have to engage, and that allows me to stay on course. And staying on course for someone in recovery, or for me, Part of it is meditation, part of it is prayer, part of it is being of service, and all those things harmoniously have to coexist in order for me to kind of be on that so-called beam. Yes, so continuous is definitely the operative word. Yeah.
Do you want to talk a little bit about, the things that we talked about? I mean, these are work. These are not things that typically people will do unless they experience some tragedy or really hard times. You want to talk a little bit about early sobriety? What brought you into the rooms?
Certainly. I think I'm a perfect example, actually, like many of us, of having to get beaten to submission. So I thought that my life was calamitous and unmanageable. End of 2016. And at that point, my marriage was beginning to fall apart. I was working in New York, commuting from Bucks County, Newtown, hour and a half. It was just unmanageable. And I was drinking more, and everything was on the brink of being lost, the marriage, the job. And I thought that was a low for me, but I wasn't prepared to do any of the work because I couldn't accept that I was an alcoholic at that point. I think intellectually I understood what I possibly could be, but internally and at my most fundamental, like at a deep level, I didn't want to accept that I was an alcoholic because my perception of one was such a departure from who I thought I was. So I didn't drink for 4.5 months, but I wasn't doing the work. I wasn't consistently going to meetings with an open mind. I wasn't consistently talking to the sponsor that was suggested I get. I wasn't consistently trying to get engaged in some form of service, even the simple stuff that we're taught to do at first, that helps you get out of yourself and change my thought process and change my maladaptive behavior, essentially. I wasn't doing any of those things at the beginning or for those 4 months. And that low that I thought I was at went even lower. And to me, the bottom of the end of my drinking was 2 suicide attempts, one almost successful, and psych wards, the things I never thought would happen to me, and lost everything. At that point, I think I was beaten to complete submission, because June 27th, I finally went to rehab. June 28th, my sobriety date, something happened to me, which really ties in, I guess, to this reading too, where I could not wrap my head around believing in this higher power thing that I would hear people talking about. But that's when I said I surrendered, and I ultimately, sincerely, and genuinely asked for help for the first time in my life. And I remember we were meditating that day. I had always scoffed at meditation. We were outside, and it was really a spiritual moment for me because I was moved. And in that moment, I knew I wanted to live. I didn't know how. And I was humbled, but I was ready to learn, and I was super willing at that point. So early sobriety for me was literally following directions. That first year, I think I was going to 3, 4 meetings a day. I was making a very concerted effort to talk to other sober people. As soon as I could get involved in service, which is a huge part of how I stay sober today. I remember my first commitment that I went to was Horsham Clinic. It's a rehab, and I felt sick to my stomach my first visit there. And I was with this old man who's got about 45 years of sobriety at that time. And he had this grin on his face coming out of that place, and I felt sick to my stomach. But I realized in that moment that how the heck does this man do this every Wednesday and he can still be so joyful? And I remember thinking, I want that. Because early sobriety, the head is racing. I still don't know if I can do this. There's so much doubt. There's so much fear, so much uncertainty. But all I could really stick to was the routine that had been established with me, and service. So that kept me busy. And ultimately, I realized these things you speak of, the continuous work that we were just talking about, that became my new normal now. And then as I stay sober, and as each month went, I got to 3 month mark, then the 6 month mark, then the 8 month mark. And I realized I haven't thought of a drink. So early sobriety was just consumed with absorbing everything I could and following every direction that I could remember and muster. And being reminded to keep it simple was a big part of that, and keeping things within the 24-hour period, because I could only focus on what I could manage on any given day. And slowly but surely, as I added more tools, I was able to become better integrated into my life while using the tools of how to stay sober. So early sobriety was not easy, but so worth it. And looking back, I, I, I'm so grateful for the people put in my path and what they taught me. Yeah.
That's beautiful, Natasha. It says in the reflection here that every now and then I pause to take a good look at my progress. And I think you just shared so beautifully like the progress in your early recovery days. And I'm wondering if you look back now and see all of the progress that you've made and what that looks like for you.
Yeah, it's interesting because I never quite appreciated it until I'm talking to my sponsor and she's able to kind of juxtaposition exactly where I came from to where I am now. And it's through relationships, through work, through my perception of things and how I look at things. It's the first time I realized, like I said, I think I shared this earlier, it was around 120 days. I was leaving a meeting, and that's the first time I realized that I had not thought of a drink. The reason I bring that up is because that's the first time I think I appreciated that this could work. I drank every day, all day, for almost 15 years. I think by the time I was at the end of my drinking, I was drinking like a 1.5 of vodka a day and couldn't eat, couldn't walk. And it was around 120 days that I realized that, holy crap, I haven't thought of a drink, which was a miracle for me. As I've hit more, like now I'm at 3.5 years of sobriety and looking at how I have changed. I'm still crazy, but my maladaptive ways of how I used to cope with things, whether it's stress, whether it's change, whether it's things not going my way. And the thing is, it's funny that weeds is a term used. My background's also in restaurants. So when you're in the weeds, it's like you're in the shits. Forgive me, I'm not sure if I can use that kind of language. But when you're inundated with everything and overwhelmed and you have no way to actually organize it, pause, and then engage it, whether with strategy or just more measure, being sober has afforded me the ability to begin doing that. And more importantly, actually being spiritual affords me the ability to do that. Much of my progress emotionally and mentally has come from the ability to meditate, which would never happen unless I was sober. So today I'm able, like Michael and I were talking about all the hats we wear. I wear so many hats in life, but I'm able to actually navigate them with ease and manageability. It's not always easy, but I react less to things and I actually allow myself to create space between reaction and how I process things. And that runs the gamut, whether it's personal relationships to work, to whatever, to the current state of the world. So much of my progress truly has been developed, or my emotional, I see more of it from my emotional maturity. And much of that is a direct result of my spiritual foundation and that journey that I continue to work on. And it helps me stay out the weeds and actually be able to enjoy the fruits that are being kind of born every day or enjoyed. And it's not every day because some days are better than others, or sometimes a bulk of time can be enjoyed of serenity, and then you just feel like blindsided. But I'm able to pull myself back and not stay stuck in like poor coping mechanisms. And that's where I see much of my progress and where my life just feels richer because I'm able to actually just be measured about how I engage it rather than just numb and blind and just killing myself through it.
Yeah, I hear the tools at work in your program. That's awesome. And I know service is a huge part of your life. I mean, we work together in the Cooperation for the Professional Community committee in our local intergroup, and what a joy that is to see not only the work that's done, but to see you in service. And yeah, it's a great thing. Do you want to talk a little bit about your service and how you've incorporated that in your program?
Absolutely. So my first exposure to service, like I said, was this 70-something-year-old man, and he had this toothless grin, and I loved it. And I still see him actually today, and I think he's got a lot of sobriety. So I'm fortunate that much of the people in my home group have a lot of sobriety, and the one thing they always do that's a common thread with them is, frequent attendance of meetings, is always helping the newcomer and finding ways to always stay engaged in service. For me, that was something that was ignited right off the bat. And I have I was also diagnosed with bipolar. So I think I became so obsessive with service right off the bat, but it was good in this instance because it was able to literally keep me out of my head and keep me engaged with doing things outside of myself. And I think for that first year, like I said, I was going to meetings all day and heavily engaged in service. We were going to rehabs. One of my favorite other commitments was actually going to the Einstein Liver Ward, where you're talking to patients who have variable degrees of liver they're all on a wait list for a liver transplant for variable reasons, and most of them is obviously alcohol abuse. But the level of denial that you see in those rooms and when you're talking to these patients, it reminds me that that's me. And at any point, that could be me if I don't do the continuous work that we speak of, if I don't use these tools on a daily basis that we've discussed, if I don't do what it takes to stay out the weeds and really be able to stay sober in a way that's sustainable. That level of denial could be me if I don't do those things. And I think it further reinforces the need to stay engaged in my sobriety. And service helps me stay engaged because work happens, life happens, and I can fall kind of off my meeting cadence at times. So service, and I make it a point to ensure that there's always something that I'm kind of locked into, whether it's chairing meetings, whether it's working with other women. But CPC, with the work you spoke of that we do, that is like so close to my heart because it's all about planting the seed. And when medical professionals find alcoholics to be hopeless, like where else do you go? Who else can give you hope? And when there's something like AA that can, and then when you have a partnership that's so powerful with professionals that are able to help potential and future alcoholics, like talk about planting the seed in ways that I could never even imagine. So that to me, I will always be a part of CPC. And I think you and I have done a great job of being able to expand our bandwidth of, we have additional academic programs joining this. And I think if the more we can grow with this, the better, and the more we can help doctors and professionals that would encounter alcoholics understand this disease better, understand resources to put alcoholics in touch with. That's the key, because then AA does the rest of the work. So service, it's my sanity. I remember I was about 8 months sober, and I had just gone back to work, and I was in a business setting that was a bit intimidating, and I did not expect it to be alcohol. I had not been around alcohol for 8 months at that time. And this business, I was in a meeting with this person that I was trying to impress, and he brings out a bottle of single malt scotch. And truly the things that saved me that day, because it's still under a year of sobriety, and I was scared out of my mind in that moment. But I was slated to go and speak with women who had also tried to kill themselves in Langhorne. And that commitment to that, I think, truly saved me. Because in that moment, they say, when it's you and that drink, you hopefully have a high power. But I think there's a reason there's 3 major pillars to sobriety, and unity and service is what leads to recovery. So service is always going to be a huge part of how I stay sober. And I encourage any new woman I work with or talk to find small ways to be of service, because it truly does begin to teach you how to get outside of yourself, which is so important for anyone new in recovery.
So relate. And, just for folks that may be listening, a little bit of clarification on CPC. One of the things that we do, and this is a big part of my sobriety as well, we escort medical students to meetings of Alcoholics Anonymous. And this might be the only time that they get to see real alcoholism, real AA in the rooms, and before they get in front of an alcoholic in their, maybe in their practice. And it's just a wonderful experience to see the light go on and see the understanding that you get when you experience alcoholism with an alcoholic in their cups, who's not getting sober. It can be completely confusing. And, one of the great things that we do as alcoholics is we lie, especially to medical professionals. So if we can give them the tools to see the recovery process and to hear about what alcoholism is from a physical, mental, and a spiritual disease, that's a beautiful thing. So, yeah, I'm grateful for to be for myself to be involved in that, but I'm thankful that you're a part of that as well. So, just wanted to clarify that. You mentioned dual diagnosis and bipolar, and I'm wondering if you have any advice for folks that may be in that position listening.
I bring it up because we see it so much, and I think it's prevalent among, because most people with some secondary diagnosis have medicated. I know I started medicating with alcohol before um, any other intervention. But suggestions I've made to anyone who struggles with any mental illness or any other dual diagnosis is AA has no monopoly, as we know, on sobriety, and we have no opinions, obviously, on any medical intervention of any sort. Our AA is there to teach you how to be sober. Um, but I remember I met a young girl who was looking for help, and she asked me about like MAT programs. And again, my purpose for being of service to her was to show her and share with her how I don't drink a day at a time. And then she shared that she also struggled with other mental issues. And what's worked for me is truly keeping it simple and understanding that if I can learn how not to drink and address my alcohol issue first, the rest does truly begin to fall into place. And that could run the gamut from either a change in a doctor or medication to I've learned how to actually begin to be able to manage much of my diagnosis with holistic approaches and much of what I've learned in AA. And it's taken a long time. I was medicated for the first 2.5 years of my sobriety. And now, obviously, with the consultation of doctors and psychiatrists, I am using tools in ways that work for me and allow me to be as free of any medication as possible and only use those interventions when necessary. But I never give any opinion on what to do medically or with any of the medication. However, I'm a big believer that if you can learn how to not drink and if you can use the tools that help you with that, you position yourself to be better able to be an advocate for yourself when it comes to your mental issues and your mental health, and then how you treat your mental health. I have seen people that have been seemingly off their I won't even use a term, but they seemed hopeless because I think the one guy I know, he had schizophrenia and it was paranoid schizophrenia. But to see him evolve and change, because we go to the same home group, just because he stayed sober, and then over time he was able to now be a better advocate for himself with his mental illness. So the two are mutually exclusive, but obviously one either feeds the other and vice versa, depending which is more in crisis or not. But I do believe that if you can deal with the alcohol issue first and learn how to do that, it does position one to be a better advocate and understand their own mental illness better, and learn how to manage it in a way that allows them to live a fuller life. Because it's funny, I remember sharing with a girlfriend who also has bipolar and is sober, and it was over this last summer. And 2020 was a crazy year for everyone, right? But things get dark, and even sober, that cycle of that depressive episode can get very dark, even in sobriety. But when I look back and we talked about kind of seeing how far you've come, it is vastly different to deal with it sober than it was under the lash of alcohol, because it was in a depressive episode that I almost successfully killed myself. And it's crazy to be able to draw back from that experience. And even when that dark cloud comes over you, you're able to really appreciate that it's not as bad as it used to be. So there is always hope as long as one has a pulse. And even with mental illness that can seem futile, especially when you're in the throes of whatever episode one may be in, if you're free of alcohol, it really, really does make it more manageable. And you remember that you do get through it and it doesn't feel as futile.
That's wonderful. And I'm really glad that we're talking. I'm glad we gave it the time today that I think this topic needs, because I still think in the rooms of recovery, sometimes there's a lot of either shame around it or a lack of willingness to discuss it openly. And our literature does clearly state that if we need to go to outside help for different things, that we should be doing it. But I think this is something we should be talking about more. So I appreciate you sharing about that. As we wrap up here, is there anything else you want our listeners to hear?
This is so fun. Thank you so much. It's funny because I never have done it in this form before. It's fascinating. No, I truly am grateful for the opportunity to be able to share whatever my experience may or may not offer someone. But much of what you both touched on is something that I think is really close to my heart, because it's always my hope that anytime I'm in a meeting or in any walk, anything I do, truly, that feeling of shame, remorse, and loneliness that I recall feeling when I first started getting sober is one that I always hope to provide someone some relief from. And whether it's mental illness, and you're so right that it's something that, especially in rooms where you feel like the culture of a meeting may not allow you to speak freely to that, but it's such a big part of what many of us have suffered from. And to be able to create a space for someone to not feel shame is something that's so important. So I am so grateful for people that I encounter in meetings or that I see and observe in just our community of recovery that create space for anyone to be able to be free not to feel those feelings, and to be free to talk about them in a way that they would not feel judged. And Michael touched on the work we do with medical students, and much of what they share is how warped their perceptions of what an alcoholic looks like and is, and how they themselves maybe had some preconceived ideas about what they thought they would look like and be, and to a degree judgment in how they engage them. And many didn't even understand that it has nothing to do with willpower, but everything to do with willingness when it comes to helping an alcoholic. And nothing punitive helps anyone, and really providing an environment that feels safe to be able to open up and begin to get honest is so important. So to me, that's what, if there's any way I can always impact someone, whether in a big or small way, is what I always hope to do and be for someone, because you never know. And that was done for me. So that's why I hope that this in some way facilitates that. So I appreciate you guys.
Natasha, I want to thank you so much for spending time with us and sharing your experience, strength, and hope. It's been fantastic. Now, I did want to ask you, if someone listening wants to get more information about CPC, how can they do that?
Yes. So if someone has even less than a year of sobriety, so what I'll share first, the criteria for someone to be a volunteer with CPC, it's cooperation with professional communities, is 1 year of continuous sobriety. And then we ask that they attend one of our CPC meetings twice. And we also suggest that they shadow a current chaperone to be shown and taught and equipped with how we actually do medical student chaperones. They can still join CPC and continue to observe and be part of the meetings and shadow as many times as they want to, which will give them a very kind of multifaceted view of how different chaperones engage the process. But we welcome everyone. And like I said, our partnerships are growing with the programs that want to be partnered with CPC. So we are constantly looking for more volunteers. And then, like I said, if it's under a year, we'll hang out with you and show you the ropes as necessary. And if you have over a year, we'll make sure we check off the other criteria so you can feel confident about being a chaperone with us.
Natasha, thank you so much.
Good times. Thank you both very much.
Thanks so much to Natasha for joining us today, and thanks to you, the listeners. If you want to find us online, you can join us on Facebook at facebook.com/group/Daily Reflection Podcast. You can find us on Twitter at Daily Reflector. If you want to read about recovery, you can find our blog at blog.dailyreflectionpodcast.com. Remember, if you're listening on Apple Podcasts, we'd love you to take a moment and provide a rating. It'll really help us reach more people and give us feedback on what you think about the show. Thanks so much, everyone. Have a great day.